Hi there everybody. So I'm back with another Q&A video here. So I'm going to jump right in. Today I'll be talking about a 15-year-old in 10th grade. I'm going to call her Tammy for the purposes of this video, but of course that's not her real name. She goes to a small school in a town where at her school there are a small town at a school where there are several kids IDing as trans. So mom said, it was really surprising to her that even though they live in this small town, the school was very affirmative towards her daughter and to the other trans-identified females at school. So I'm going to start with a bit of a timeline. So mom found out later that in 4th grade, something happened to this child. So the daughter reported it as something very bad happened. And she won't talk to mom about it. She won't talk to counselors about it. And the daughter says that at the time she didn't know it was wrong, but that something bad happened. She didn't report this in 4th grade. It was later when mom found this out. Timeline continues. 6th grade, she was hanging out with a boy that mom thought was just a friend. Turned out later that it was a first date and they liked each other, unrelated to the 4th grade incident. 7th grade, or probably around age 11, she told mom very kind of flippantly that she's still trying to figure out her sexuality and who she likes. And she said she might like girls, she might like boys, she's not sure. And mom was very accepting either way. She said whoever you like is fine. And then around the time of puberty, Tammy reports feeling really uncomfortable with her large breasts. And sometime during 8th grade at like a formal dance, Tammy's friend made a comment about the size of her breasts, and Tammy reports that made her feel very uncomfortable, really embarrassed her. She didn't want to talk about it. In 9th grade, at the age of 13, Tammy leaves a note on the kitchen counter the day after Thanksgiving for mom to find. And mom reads the letter, and apparently older sister also reads the letter. There are several kids in this family, I think probably 4 kids, I think. And mom reports that she couldn't function for a while. So I don't know what that means in terms of her initial response to the letter. I'm sure she was very confused and shocked, as are many parents. And the older sister, hugged the girl, Tammy, and said, "I love you, like we're here for you no matter what." So they found out after that she had already been going by a different name at school, but parents didn't know. Teachers hadn't notified them. And the daughter, when they asked her about it, she admitted herself, I was reading stuff on the internet, and that's what has led me to believe that I'm FTM trans. And, the research on the internet is something that I want you guys to see, and we need to talk about it. So Tammy secretly bought her own binder. Parents didn't know about it, but apparently she kind of volunteered to stop wearing it because it was hurting her. So now Tammy is kind of wearing sports bras. I'll talk more about that later. So at the time when, at 13, when she left this note for parents, she was already seeing a counselor for other issues. And mom was surprised to learn that Tammy didn't talk to her counselor about this at all. This is kind of self-diagnosed, just internet searching. That's how this has all come about. And she wouldn't talk to her counselor about it at the time. And she wouldn't talk to her counselor about the very bad thing. Eventually, I think mom got her to talk to the counselor a bit about the gender identity issues, but we didn't really have a lot of success there, so I'll talk about that more later. As of right now, daughter kind of doesn't have a counselor. She said she didn't want to see that counselor anymore, and mom didn't think the counselor was helping anyway, so right now, daughter doesn't have a counselor, which is actually probably a good idea. Personality-wise, mom reports that Tammy's always been really shy. She's had body image issues. She gets really embarrassed. She doesn't want to talk too much about things. And she can get really stubborn and shut down whenever mom tries to discuss anything related to trans. So other relevant info, Tammy and mom have always been really, really close. So she said, we had mother-daughter nights all the time. She would tell me everything about her life. And that's why the letter struck mom so fiercely, because it seemed to be so secretive, which was really out of character for Tammy. Mom feels like she's making a huge mistake, and she's very concerned that Tammy won't open up about whatever happened in 4th grade. Tammy reports that the 4th grade incident is a big reason she feels this way now. So obviously there's a link that's so obvious that even the daughter recognizes they're related. Mom says, I've often wondered if she was on the spectrum. She has an older son with mild Asperger's, And she didn't know that girls and boys tend to display symptoms of autism or Asperger's that are very different from one another. Historically, when we think about the kind of spectrum disorders, we do tend to think about the way it manifests in boys. So mom's wondering about that now. She also included that she wants to be homeschooled next year. So Tammy is reporting that she wants to be homeschooled, but mom's not sure that's the right decision. She feels like she might be bullied at school, but Tammy denies it. She won't really open up more about her. But mom is worried that if she does homeschool, she'll isolate her even more and give her more reasons to be online searching for friendships and connections. So I agree with mom on that point for sure. Another interesting point is when sister read the letter and hugged her and said, "We love you," Tammy reported to mom like, "Hey, that was the first time she said she loved me." So this is really important. I'm going to talk about that later. I want to make sure not to forget. Recently, Tammy has been opening up more to mom. So this is a good thing that I'll address a little bit later in the video. She's shared with her that that 6th grade hangout was actually a date. Mom didn't know that at the time, so she's opened up to her a little bit about that. And Tammy reported to mom that at a couple of dances or some school functions, a girl kind of flirted with her or hit on her, and that really freaked Tammy out. So she's opening up more to mom, and she's telling her more things about how she feels, even though she's really shy and keeps things to herself. So in terms of what parents have done so far, as I said before, mom was in a big state of shock. She said she couldn't function for a few months. She didn't share details with me about what that means, but I imagine that it was probably something that she either couldn't really address directly, or perhaps it was one of those combative situations where mom's trying to, share some rationale with the child and maybe trying to talk her out of it. I don't know. I'm not sure what it means when she says I was in shock and couldn't function. My gut tells me that she withdrew and she just couldn't really deal with the situation, understandably. It seems like the sister was pretty supportive and loving. Mom's tried to normalize the awkward feelings that she's having around her breasts. So, mom did share with her, when I was a kid, I had really large breasts and I felt awkward too. And she's been trying to kind of just normalize this to help her daughter understand that it's a normal thing to experience. Like I said, she stopped wearing a binder. I hope I said that. She had secretly gotten a binder. Making sure I said that. So daughter secretly got a binder that parents didn't know about, but she stopped wearing it because it was hurting. And so since then, mom has just kind of gotten her sports bras, and that's what she wears now. So probably appropriately sized, which is fine. And they did let her cut her hair. So mom and dad said that they're not okay with a name change or male pronouns. Daughter, of course, says it makes her feel comfortable when someone calls her by a boy name. And it makes her uncomfortable when people tell her she's beautiful. Someone recently called her a guy, when she was with dad. Mom wasn't there, and she reported to dad that made her very happy. She didn't say anything to mom about it, probably knowing that it would have made mom very, very upset and disturbed. So mom says she's kind of just trying to plant seeds of doubt and reassure her that her feelings about her body are normal. So that's great. Discussion about the name change. I thought this was really good that mom and dad had done that. So mom said, I was very upset and told her that her father and I picked out her name with great thought. She was named after her grandmother who passed away right before she was born. I was hoping this would help her give up the name when she got back to school, but it didn't. So the school has been pretty affirmative, and they are going by her new name and pronouns there, which surprised mom. So having that conversation and explaining a little bit about her legacy is important, because that's what identity actually means. Identity is not a label that you select from a list and then try to apply it to yourself by acting it out. Identity is who are we? Where do we come from? Who are our people? How do I incorporate parts of my own legacy with who I want to become in the future? That's what identity means. So I think it was great that they had a conversation with her about that. Just because you do the right thing, it doesn't mean it clicks immediately for your kid. It doesn't mean a light bulb goes off and they have a magic change of heart in the moment. But it's important to instill in your child some information about like who they are as a person and what's true about their identity. Mom says, in the meantime, your videos are helping. She's trying to plant those seeds of doubt. Obviously, daughter's been opening up a lot more to her, which is really great. And mom's been watching detransition YouTube videos and trying to take advice from the young people who are, you know, talking about their experience and sharing tips with parents. But she hasn't showed her daughter any of those videos, and she says she's really glad she hasn't, because she gets very stubborn and gets shut down when they talk about gender. So the specific questions that mom had for me, she said, you know, can you recommend a local therapist to help us? Unfortunately, based on their location, I didn't know anybody. Mom, unfortunately, has her own therapist, and unfortunately the therapist said to mom, you know, all you can do is just learn to accept her for who she is. Many therapists obviously don't really understand like what's going on, and so they just kind of repeat what they hear. So I imagine that feels very hard, because in therapy you want to talk about the most difficult things, and if your therapist gives you that answer, you can't really open up. So I'm hoping mom has at least some support system online or otherwise on the internet, because of course there are many parents in the same boat. And you know, Patreon is a good place to also, you know, connect with other people, and some people feel free to share their stories on my page, some people don't, but there are a lot of other support forums. So I hope mom has some support outside of her therapy. And then, should I be looking for a PTSD therapist or someone who specializes in gender issues? I'll answer those questions later. I'll come back to these. So let me just start with reflecting some positives that I'm noticing. Some of them I've already shared. Daughter has been opening up a lot more. So that means something is happening in the right direction. Whether it's simply an issue of time and maturity, or is there something about the way mom is talking with her that's changing? I don't know, it's hard to tell. You know, of course, as kids get older, they get more mature. And sometimes, as we have distance from a scary situation, we can feel a little bit safer to talk about it, you know, if we've been able to process it a little bit in our own way. So the fact that she's opening up to mom more is a really good thing. I also noticed the fact that Tammy said, a very bad thing happened to me, and at the time I didn't know it was wrong. That indicates a level of insight too. It means that now she does know it was wrong. So obviously, having something happen to you and not realizing it's wrong at the time is super confusing. But if you can look back with some sort of insight, even if you haven't fully managed and processed it, to be able to look back and say, you know what, that was wrong. Like, that wasn't my fault, or that shouldn't have happened. That's very powerful, and it's an important part of the kind of healing process. Another good thing is that she voluntarily stopped wearing her binder. I mean, that is a really, really big deal. That means she's still listening to the kind of signals coming from her body. Kids who are super dissociated, as you can tell when you listen to videos from like young detransition people, oftentimes they withstand and tolerate such an excruciating amount of physical pain from binding and from these different body modifications that they just accept that that's part of their reality. This girl said, no, I don't want to be in pain, and she stopped wearing her binder. That's very important. That's a really good sign. Things to think about that might still need to be worked on. So I noticed in mom's update that she said she's been planting those seeds of doubt. That's really important. But this is a common pattern I see a lot. Parents often start with the planting seeds of doubt. Even before they have found me or my videos or suggestions, that's kind of a natural response, right? If your kid brings an idea to you that seems totally wacky, you're going to challenge it, and that's natural. But the fact that she still completely shuts down at any mention of trans, that indicates to me that there's still more work to do on like what I've been calling phase 1, which is just making this topic feel safe to talk about, creating more kind of comfort around it. And so it's in opposition with challenging and planting seeds of doubt. You can't do both exactly at the same time. You know, within a conversation there might be moments where you're doing one or the other, But if you have a kid who's shutting down completely at the mention of it, that means you really need to put all of the challenging and planting seeds of doubt to the side for now. And you really have to start with that reset again. So I talk about the reset in my Planting Seeds of Doubt video, so you can go back and reference that if you'd like. But in this case, I would say mom might want to directly call out what she's seeing. So I really believe calling out what you see can be very useful. So you might say, you know, I've been thinking about, I'm so proud of you that you've told me some more things about like your friendships and what happened at the school dance with that girl, and I'm really glad you're opening up. But I'm realizing that it's still really hard for you to open up and talk about gender identity. And so I'm wondering, when I think back about our conversations, I might not have been such a good listener. I know I've kind of challenged you and shared my concerns with you, but I realize that I need to be a really good listener because I want you to be able to tell me about how you're feeling. That might be a way to kind of start that conversation. And again, the hard part is, it's one thing to know the words I'm saying, but it's a totally different thing for you as a parent to be in the emotional place where that's feasible for you. And you have to know yourself, like, this may not be possible for mom right now. That's okay. But there is nobody else in the world who is going to be challenging your daughter, and nobody else who's going to listen in a nuanced, careful way. When teachers hear her say, I'm really a boy, they're bypassing all of the critical thought and they're taking it literally and they're saying, okay, buddy, come sit down, son. Like, they're not thinking. And on the other hand, if all you do is say, no, you're not a boy, here's the answer, then she's left completely by herself with these confusing thoughts. And I remember in one of the Peak Resilience Project videos, they talk about something like this. Like, if all you're doing is challenging, it's almost proving that you don't understand, because feeling dysphoric in this kind of cultural age where kids are basically groomed into dysphoria online, it is super confusing, and it's not something you can just talk out of in a couple of conversations. So it really requires for us as adults who are trying to help to slow down, kind of put aside our own emotions, and be curious about how this kid got here and what can I do to really listen so that I can understand the confusion in her mind without immediately trying to change it. So I would say that first suggestion is kind of start from square one, do a reset. Well, first kind of emotionally do some soul searching and preparing yourself. Clearly your therapy should be a place where you could do this, and I'm so sorry, Mom, that is not possible for you. If you know you have an older daughter, I don't know how old she is. If she's a young teen, this is probably inappropriate, but if you have like an adult daughter or your husband or some other adult in your life to help you with your own response to this so that you can kind of take this more calm, neutral approach. She is a confused child. So as the adult, you have to really be able to kind of calm yourself so that you can be there for her. She's desperately needing help, right? So I would say work on that and try to do another reset and see if you can spend some time encouraging her to share little things with you. It doesn't have to be like a 3-hour conversation where you get deep into the weeds, just like here and there little things where your responses stay in that kind of neutral category, right? I'm so glad you told me. I really love you. I imagine that's hard. Thank you for telling me that. Those are neutral responses. They don't require you to come up with some great kind of challenge, and they also don't require you to say, you know, I don't want you to destroy your body. Like, just keep it neutral. I imagine that will help her open up more about trans stuff. On the other hand, sometimes kids just don't want to talk to their mom about this, but I think it's important given how as adult helpers we're very alone. There's no one else who's really willing to ask these questions, so it's going to be on us as adults and parents to try to be that safe space where we can listen with a careful ear. I wanted to speak about normalization. So when you are past the point of talking more openly with her about gender and being a better listener. I think it would be really interesting to take this idea of normalization another step further. So something that, I've been thinking about as I do this work, normalization is important just to initially let the kid know, hey, what you're feeling is normal. Lots of us feel that way. What it doesn't do is it doesn't solve the problem, because kids want to solve the problem right now. So just knowing that a lot of people felt miserable in teenagehood doesn't really give them a solution. So I think it's important to frame it as something that can help her be curious about how she's responding to that discomfort. And again, I don't think this is something you should do now. It's something you should do later once there's a better dialogue going on about trans. Because what's essentially happening is, yes, it's normal to feel these feelings, but the way you respond to them should not be to basically take it out on yourself. If I am uncomfortable with aspects of being female, I shouldn't take it out on my femaleness. I can find different ways of navigating the world. I can find different ways of thinking about what's happening. And rather than just feeling like, well, I have to just accept that this is the way it is, it's more a question of, well, why am I beating myself up maybe for an inappropriate comment somebody else made? That's not my fault. That's not my body's fault. That's not femaleness's fault. So I think these kids, especially in the females, are struggling with that distinction. Like, am I gonna internalize the mean thing another person did and beat myself up along with them beating me up for it? No. We of course want to be kind to ourselves. If someone is mean to us, we don't kind of gang up on ourselves with that other person. So you might want to find a way to talk with her about that. How can you find more compassion? If you're being mean to yourself in your own head about your body, if you're saying this body part doesn't belong here, I was born wrong, those are thoughts and words that will really make you feel much crappier in your body. I certainly heard a detransitioned woman with an incredible interview that Benjamin Boyce did. Her name is Ben, and her Twitter handle is GNCcentric. And in that video, she was talking about how the more she tried to see herself as a man, the more her dysphoria got worse, which is completely rational. If you believe your breasts are literally not supposed to be there, and the more you're trying to pass, of course it's going to feel like your body's betraying you when you just simply look down and notice your own body parts. So trying to break that cycle of kind of confirming that your body's wrong, that's really important. It's very hard to do. I don't think that this is a simple thing, or that you can just say that, Mom, and that magically she will understand it. But that's an important step to go beyond normalization, because normalization is still basically saying, you feel like crap, that's normal. What we want her to understand is, you're not relegated to feeling like crap forever just because you're female. Females can feel good, and not necessarily for sexual attention. It's not like you have to kind of play the game and gussy yourself up and feel happy with sexual attention. It's more a matter of, that's not your baggage to carry. If somebody else is saying something to you, that's because of their perception, which is probably flawed. You don't have to carry that for yourself, and you don't have to take it out on yourself. So that's an approach that you might think about that you can kind of address later down the line. So, Mom, of course, wanted to know, how do I get her to talk about what happened? So I'm going to offer a perspective here that I have found to be really useful recently. And it's a new kind of way of thinking for me, because I come from, I used to work with, first of all, I want to say we don't know what happened, right? This is a kid who was in 4th grade. In 4th grade, a lot of things can feel really bad and scary that maybe, as an adult, we might say, oh, thank God it wasn't that bad. We just don't know. We don't know what happened. But I'm just going to say, I'm sure as a mom, her mind's going to all the worst case scenarios. That's my guess. As a person who has worked with kids who have gone through really terrible things, that's where my mind kind of went to, but I don't want to make assumptions. But my background, I worked with adults and kids who had experienced domestic violence and sexual violence. And the framework at this particular organization was very much, the kind of typical framework about oppressor and victim, and it was useful in some ways because I think one of the things it did was helped us to show our clients that, like, there's nothing you did that egged on this person who harmed you. That's an important distinction to make. But I think the piece that was missing, at least, was that it still kind of treated the victim or the survivor as somehow like a damaged person. And while there may be elements of that that have some truth in certain moments, like, of course, if you experience a really serious trauma, it's going to impact the way you think and the way you feel and the way you operate in the world for some time. But that's not an essential property of a person who's experienced trauma. So I've been thinking more about this kind of hero's journey approach, and I went to a workshop for this many years ago, and I remember at the time sitting there thinking, this is bullshit. Like, what are you talking about? These people have been really hurt by an oppressor, and like that was my mindset. But as I worked with kids, I realized they need a sense of hope that, like, they're not ruined by something bad that happened in 4th grade. So I'm going to include a link to it's not an academic paper, but it's kind of an outline of how this theory might be used in the event that this child experienced a sexual trauma. We don't know that. I want to keep framing it, but when I make these videos, I don't have all the details, and obviously mom doesn't have all the details either. So like we're all kind of working on this together. So I'm just going to include different resources so that as you do learn more, you can have different kind of ways to frame the way you're thinking about her, and that will help inform how you talk with her about stuff. So within that context, let me say, here's what I would do. I wouldn't be hounding her for details. When we hear from a child something bad happened, the way our brains work is we just want to know what happened. That's to reassure us. That's so that we know how freaked out we should be. But that's not necessarily healing or therapeutic for her to just list the details of what was done. That's not helpful. So I would focus instead on her bravery. So focus on the fact that even though she hasn't told you everything, you're really, really, really proud of her that she told you that something happened. And you need to tell her, this is maybe one of those things where like mom and daughter are in bed and, she's snuggled up next to you, and you just say, sometimes really, really scary things happen to kids. And it can be hard and confusing, and it might take a really long time to feel better. But I know that you're really strong, and that I know together we can get through it. Even if you're not ready to talk to me about everything yet, I just want you to know that it's okay to take your time, and that I know you're very strong and you can survive going through something scary. So that would be maybe like a good first thing to say. That way there's no pressure. You're not telling her, you have to tell me something. You're just kind of laying the foundation for this idea that, like, you're strong and brave, and I know that you can get through this, whatever it happens to have been. So again, if your mind is racing with all the worst case scenarios, it's important when you do sit down and talk with her, you try to remain as calm and soothing as possible, because she likely has a whole whirlwind of internal emotions that are big and scary, and she probably feels too afraid to approach them. So if you can be calm and safe and loving, that's a container where she can have her big emotions, and like, my mommy can handle it. My mommy is brave and strong, and so I can maybe break down and cry. Like, there has to be that, like, yin-yang in any human relationship. Like, if two people are falling apart together, where is that stable foundation, for the person who needs it most? And in this moment, your daughter probably is dealing with a lot. That's why it's also important to, process that with your therapist. Like, you probably have a lot of fear around that, and just trying to imagine what happened to my baby. Like, that's a natural feeling. So you need to be able to process that with an adult who can contain your feelings, so that when you come to your daughter, you are that stable, calm adult who can help her have a place for her feelings. So, the idea should be focusing on equipping her for the process of how she's going to face this. Again, that's in contrast to the idea that, like, I just need you to tell me all the details. This is a matter of framing that, like, you know, this is going to be a long road, and you're strong and brave, and even in the hardest times, I'm here for you. We can do this. That's the framing. And I think it's important to weave into, you know, these conversations, which again should happen over time, incrementally. It's not like in one day you're going to resolve all this. But I think it should be really clear that, like, whatever happened to her is contributing to her discomfort, which means there are a lot of different things all kind of mushed up together, and it's hard to figure out what is what. You can even use an analogy of Play-Doh. I went to go see my best friend recently, and she has 3 kids, and we were playing Play-Doh, and of course some of the purple Play-Doh and the orange Play-Doh and the blue Play-Doh, they all got mushed together, and eventually it becomes kind of this like ball of different colors, and they get stuck together. Like, it's hard to figure out what is causing what when lots of different scary or confusing experiences get mushed up, you know, in your heart and your mind. So you might use that analogy to help her understand that, like, we have to take our time and unravel the Play-Dohs one at a time to see what's going on. Let's see what else. I would say, you know, the issue there is that sometimes when scary things happen, it can feel really good to run away. And that's probably what's happening, right? Like, the daughter knows that this thing from 4th grade is a big reason why she's feeling this way. So there's probably an element of escape here. So it's important for mom to say, you know, if a part of you has been hurt by this thing that happened, it might feel easier to just run away and, like, leave that part of you behind or get rid of that part of you. But what really helps people to become strong and brave is to face what really happened to us and to become bigger than that problem, or to become stronger than that problem. And I think this is where you'll see in that PDF that I'm going to include that hero's journey analogy for sexual abuse victims is really powerful. Even if this is not a sexual abuse situation, it's still something that made her uncomfortable, and she's linked it to her discomfort with her femaleness, and she's trying to run away from it. So it's still valuable to have this framing that, like, the way we get stronger and braver is actually by facing what happened to us and, you know, making sense of it and becoming bigger people. So I think that would be an important thing to loop in. And you might even say maybe the idea of becoming a boy makes you feel like you can protect yourself from scary things like that. You know, is that part of what's going on? Does it feel maybe like it would be safer to be a boy? And again, this would be very important that in these moments, you know, you don't challenge on like an ideological level, that you really, really listen. And it doesn't have to be about, well, it's impossible to be a boy because, you know, you have a girl body. Like, that's too technical. I think if she does say, yeah, it would feel better to be a boy, you can say, well, you know, that's one way. But the problem is, we all face really scary things, whether we're girls or boys, and some scary kinds of things do happen to girls sometimes, but also girls can be very brave and strong, and they can become more powerful than they think by facing what happened. So something like that, again, it has to be in your own language in a way that makes sense for your daughter. But, you know, all of this is going to be something that takes a lot of time, and that you have to be patient with. You know, you might not get much out of her, but maybe you, like, say a couple of things that are valuable while you tuck her into bed, and you say, I love you so much, I'm proud of you, and I know this is hard, but we can talk about it another time. You know, make yourself available. You can say, even if you don't want to talk right now, anytime you're feeling like, you know, I really need to tell mom about what happened, I'm here for you, take your time. But as long as you continue to help her frame this as, like, she's brave, she's strong, she's resilient, she can get through this, you know, she's so courageous, that is going to give her the strength to say, you know, I can face this. Maybe not right now, but eventually. You know, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. Here are some things to kind of be wary of. You don't want to scare her more by amping up the anxiety in the situation. So You know, I would imagine for a kid that, like, if you say, did somebody do something to you, or if anyone hurt you, I'm gonna, you know, do this or do that, or you don't want to do that, because that's just gonna highlight the fear that was probably an inherent aspect of this experience in the first place. You want to really foster this idea of, like, you're brave, we can talk about it, you're going to be bigger than this, like, it's okay. You don't want to just focus on either her being harmed, her being damaged, of course, like if anyone just, you know, ruined you, like none of that, of course. And then it's not so much about just the details. Though this is going to be important. Like, she is going to have to face the details of what happened so that she can kind of write a new narrative around this thing. Like, obviously this has been a scary thing that she's treated as though it's unspeakable, you know, so she's going to have to be able to share the details with you, but it's one step at a time. And I think focusing on, I know you're strong, I know you're brave, I know you can do this, that kind of framing will be a good place to start that might help open up these conversations. Okay, Mom asked about therapy, so I'm going to address that. Let me see really quick about, okay, so the sister, I wanted to say something about that. The fact that this kind of gender crisis, let's say, has been, at least the way she perceives it, the first time it's elicited the words "I love you" from sister, that's really significant. And I don't say that necessarily in a way that implies something bad, but this is a transformational opportunity for her to realize that, like, as a family, my parents and my sisters, my siblings, they care about me, they love me. That might be obvious to you all as older people, but sometimes kids get so skewed in the way they think about things. So this is really important to kind of notice, and we don't want her to think that, well, whenever I have like a gender crisis, that's when my family pays attention to me. We don't want to kind of link those two things together, but it is important that now family hasn't been dismissive. You guys haven't said, okay, just get over it, this is stupid. You know, like, everybody's taken this seriously and it's impacted everybody. And I think that's really meaningful, especially when you listen to detransitioned people talk about how when their parents treated this as like this, you know, thing that they just wanted them to get over, or just a problem to be fixed, it didn't really sit well, which is understandable because they're going through a very confusing identity crisis. So it is good that sister was so like loving about it and open about it and supportive. And it sounds like a really good response, not necessarily affirming and saying, oh, congratulations, you're my brother, but instead realizing the gravity of this struggle and saying, oh my gosh, I love you, like, we'll get through this together. That's a really big deal. And she's lucky to have a sister like that. And obviously the sister bond is important. Like, I say that as someone with a sister, and it's a very special connection. And so this is kind of an amazing opportunity for you as women in this family to get really close. So, okay, I'm almost out of time here. I think there's this idea, I think, that I'm piecing together, that if a kid has an emotional crisis, that they need a therapist. And I'm a therapist and I work with kids, so obviously I believe that to a degree. But I also think that can rob parents of the opportunity to be that loving, stable, grounded adult. You're the most important adult in her life, regardless of what the exact family dynamic is. I don't have to know you to know that as a mom and as a dad and as a sister, like, you are the most important people in her life. And I feel like trying to find a counselor to talk to her about this trauma, I don't know if that's the right direction. She told you. So that means slowly but surely, she is coming to you with deeply personal information. I mean, if she's kept it this close to her heart for this long, that means it's had a big emotional impact on her. It's been really confusing and hard to process. And nobody is going to love her as much as you do. So I don't know if you need to like find a PTSD therapist. Like I don't know. I just feel like you can be what she needs right now. And this is an opportunity as a family to be there together for her. So I don't think that it's a good idea to just run out and find a therapist. First of all, one of the reasons that I'm probably feeling this way right now at this point in my career, it's 2019, most therapists, if they find out she's having a gender issue, their brain like switches off and it becomes just like this very narrow, simplistic way of like affirming and like exploring gender together. So even if you found a PTSD therapist, they're likely going to attribute some of her symptoms to the fact that she is not being affirmed. So it's hard to find someone who can even do like the normal job of a therapist. And even if you could find that, I still think this is obviously deeply personal to her. And I don't know if this is just, like I come from a multicultural background, and there's this idea that I have noticed in like Western culture that like people go to a therapist and then they just tell them all their personal stuff. And I come from a background where that's not like a thing really that people do, even though I'm a therapist and I'm very open. I don't think that that is a process that just happens as easily as we think. Just because somebody is a trained counselor, it doesn't mean your 17-year-old is going to just spill her guts to them. There's something special about what your mom knows about you that a therapist is never going to understand. And I feel like this is really important to just try and work this out together as a family. I mean, this is deeply personal, and I think it's important to do it together. So I would say be consistent and work on some of your own emotional reactions, and be consistent with your daughter, offering like a loving place to talk, and just continue to show confidence in her ability to share more with you about whatever happened and to get through whatever that 4th grade situation is. I'm going to just see if there's anything else. I think that's mostly it. I mean, I've talked in lots of other videos about topics that will apply really well here. I think the fact that she has not been binding, that shows you something really important. So if you can kind of do that phase 1 and approach the 4th grade thing in the way that I've described today, I think that will be a really good starting point. So to the mom whose video this is for, feel free to send me a private message if there are other questions or other things that you feel I've left out. I think you're probably going to have a long road ahead of you in dealing with whatever this 4th grade thing is. But I think framing it from this perspective and taking it slow rather than just asking her for a bunch of details, you might find that this is very useful for you. So I certainly wish you the best of luck, and I hope that your daughter is able to find her strength and her power and resilience, and start kind of being more honest about facing the realities of her life and what has happened. So I hope this video was useful for you, Mom, and for anyone else watching, and thank you guys so much. I will be making another Q&A probably next month. I'm going to try to do these once a month, and I look forward to making the next video. So thank you all, and I'll see you soon. Bye.